Principles and procedures of materials development for language learning. What should ELT materials have? Tomlinson, forthcoming 2010, says, this literature reveals that many experienced authors rely on their intuitions about what works and make frequent use of activities from their repertoire which seems to fit with their objectives. The materials should drive ELT. First, expose the learners to language in authentic use. Second, have learners to pay attention to features of authentic input. Third, provide the learners with opportunities to use the target language to achieve communicative purpose. Fourth, provide opportunities for outcome feedback. Fifth, achieve impact in the sense that they arouse and sustain the learner's curiosity and attention. Sixth, stimulate intellectual, aesthetic, and emotional involvement. The main principles of language acquisition to follow when developing materials. Principle of language acquisition. A prerequisite for language acquisition is that the learners are exposed to a rich, meaningful, and comprehensible input of language in use. In order to acquire the ability to use the language effectively, the learners need a lot of experience of the language, being used in a variety of different ways for a variety of purposes. They need to be able to understand enough of this input to gain positive access to it, and it needs to be meaningful to them. Krashen, 1985. Principle of material development. The materials contains a lot of spoken and written text. The language learners are exposed to is authentic in the sense that it represents how the language is typically used. The language used is determined and interpreted in relation to its content of use. The learners are exposed to sufficient samples of language in authentic use. Examples of materials. At the beginning of every lesson, you may read a poem or story, or telling a joke or anecdote. Principle of language acquisition. 2. If the learner don't feel any emotion while exposed to language in use, they are unlikely to acquire anything from their experience. Feeling enjoyment, pleasure, and happiness, feeling empathy, being amused, being excited, and being stimulated are most likely to influence acquisition positively, but feeling annoyance, anger, fear, opposition, and sadness is more useful than feeling nothing at all. Principles of material development. Basing a unit on a test or a task which is likely to achieve effective and cognitive engagement rather than on a teaching point select from a syllabus. The activities which get the learners to think about what they are reading or listening to and respond to it personally. The activities which get learners to think and feel before, during, and after using the target language for communication. Example of materials. Use the activities which help the learners to activate their minds prior to the experiencing the test to simulate their own language production. Principle of language acquisition 3. Language learners who achieve positive effect are much more likely to achieve communicative competence than those who do not. to feel that the students are achieving something worthwhile because the positive emotion seems to be the most useful in relation to language acquisition. Principle of material development. The tests and tags are an interesting, relevant, and enjoyable sales theme when success is accomplished. Stimulate emotive response, inviting learners to articulate their feelings about the test before asking them to analyze it. Examples of material. Always consult the students about the topics they would like to read about and discuss. Principles of language acquisition 4. In L1, learning and use learner typically make use of mental imaging. In L2, learning and use learning typically focus narrowly on linguistic decoding and encoding. Visual imaging plays a very important role in L1 learning and use, that it tends not to be used by L2 learners, and that L2 learners can be trained to use visual imaging to improve the learning and use of the L2. Principles of material development. The activities which get learners to visualize and or use inner speech before, during, and after experiences and written or spoken text. The activity which get learners to visualize and or use inner speech before, during, and after using language themselves. The activities which help the learners to reflect on their mental activity during the task and then to try to make more use of mental strategies in a similar task. Samples of materials. Before asking the student to read a poem about a boy's first day at school, you must ask the student to visualize their own first day at school and then to talk to themselves about how they felt. Principle of language acquisition 5. Language learner can benefit from knowledge salience features on the input. It is developed when a learner has been engaged in a test effectively and cognitively, and then returns to it to investigate its language use. Principles of material development. When the student focuses narrowly on a specific feature of the test, they are able to develop their discoveries in relation to their awareness of the full context of use. Help the learners to make discovery for themselves. Examples of materials. The student experience a potentially engaging test, respond to it personally, and then focus on a particular feature of the test in order to make discoveries about it. Principle of language acquisition 6. Learners need opportunity to use language to try to achieve communicative purposes. If they are participating in interaction, they are also being pushed to clarify and elaborate, and they are also likely to elicit meaningful and comprehensible input from their interlocutors. Principle of material development. The learners produce language in order to achieve intended outcomes. The learners are using language rather than just practicing specific features on it. The learners develop their ability to communicate fluency accurately, appropriately, and effectively. The learners are responding to an authentic stimulus. Example of materials. The students have to produce a test which is a development from one they have just experienced. Conclusions. The author concludes that the teaching should meet the needs and wants of the learners, and also materials need to be written in such a way that the teacher can make use of them as a resource and not have to follow them as a script.